Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. I'm SocietySucks and today I'm checking out why didn't the great powers join the Franco-Prussian War by History Matters. I really don't know much about this war, so I'm going into this mostly blind.
One of the most interesting parts of the Franco-Prussian War is the fact that no other major European powers got involved. And given that most of them would have had at least something to gain from joining one side or the other, this raises a question. Why didn't any of the great powers join the Franco-Prussian War? So we'll start with the easiest
Probably
one
because
to
they
answer,
didn't want to start a
the United
wider
States.
conflict.
There were two major reasons that the US didn't interfere. The first was that America didn't care. This stuff had basically no short-term effect on the United States, and American leaders had little interest in European politics in general. The second reason was that the US had only recently ended its bloody and damaging civil war. Launching some overseas war when much of the country was in ruins in order to help either an autocratic despot or a despotic autocrat would have been one of the worst ideas possible. Closer to the action, the other great powers had more interesting motives. 4 years prior, the Austrians had been utterly defeated by Prussia and its ally Italy. The Austrians were certainly looking for some form of revenge, but its loss had almost brought about the collapse of the Habsburg monarchy, and so the empire was in the process of major reforms. This involved compromising with the Hungarians, hence the Austrian Empire's transformation into the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And the Hungarians did not want war, especially so Austrians could have greater say in Saxony or Bavaria. Also, there was concern that it could leave them open to attack by either Russia or, more likely, Italy, and as such they clearly weren't ready and the risks were too great. Whereas the Italians had been close allies with the Prussians in the previous major European war, and so they would seem the most likely to get involved. The problem was that Italy had positive relations with both Berlin and Paris. Without Prussia's help in 1866, the Italians couldn't have driven the Austrians out of Italy proper. However, the Prussians weren't willing to continue the war to help Italy expand further, and France, especially its Emperor Napoleon III, had played a vital role in both Italy's unification and its annexation of Venetia. Divided loyalties aside, the main reason they couldn't join was a pragmatic one. The Italian army just wasn't good enough. Prussia and France were the two most capable land forces on the continent, whereas Italy had struggled against the lackluster Austrian army, and as such it was seen as a terrible idea to do so. Similarly, the Russians had mixed feelings about the combatants, in that they were largely quite negative. Whilst relations were somewhat good with Prussia, it was seen as a rising challenger for dominance in Eastern Europe, whereas France had recently fought against the Russians and humiliated them in the Crimean War. Helping Prussia would have done little to aid Russia except for making its neighbour more powerful, and aiding a country that was actively hostile to you was never going to happen. To the north, the British at this point were mostly
so pretty much everyone either despised both,
so long as the balance of power remained in check, that is.
Sort
Prussia
of allied
was an old
with
ally
both.
of Britain, whereas France had made the unforgivable mistake of being France. That said, the expectation in London was that France was probably going to win, but the plan was that Britain would then pressure France to not take too much and harm its old ally. And all of this is why the Franco-Prussian War never expanded into a much larger conflict. The interests of the great powers weren't served by fighting, but instead by mediating the peace. And since the new Germany didn't take too much, everybody except France was mostly happy.
I mean, France should be pretty happy too that they didn't take much. So overall, the reason why nobody joined was because they either had good relations with both or they had bad relations with both. And pretty much nobody wanted a wider conflict. Certain players just weren't ready for another war, others were not interested whatsoever, like the US. So it ended up being just Prussia and France. I really don't have much more to say here, so I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider subscribing and leaving a like. If you want to see more reactions, check out this video right here. And with that, I hope I'll see you in the next video.